Welcome everyone, as I said. My name is Sophie Sertan. I'm the Acting Director General of IEG, the Independent Evaluation Office of the World Bank Group. In IEG, what we do is continuously evaluating the World Bank's results and performance for project, program, strategies with the objective to evaluate, assess progress towards implementation of our twin goals, eradicating poverty and boosting shared prosperity, but also, and as importantly, with the objective to identify lessons about what works, where, under which circumstances, to enhance development impact. And in today's session on disruptive technologies and inclusive growth, what works, what we're hoping to do is really to start a conversation. There's going to be no final answer on a topic like this, obviously, but start a conversation on the potential of disruptive technology to foster accelerated progress towards inclusive growth. As you all know by now, in these annual meetings, disruptive technologies are defined by the World Bank Group as technologies that have the potential to lead to a step progress in decreasing the cost or increasing access to products and services, but in a manner that is susceptible to alter in a significant and positive manner traditional avenues, pathways of economic development. These technologies include, as you're well known, artificial intelligence, cloud information, nanotechnology, biometrical technologies, and so forth and so forth. These technologies obviously have the potential to transform human life, to transform societies, to transform governments. And we want to start this session with the premise, the suggested premise that they have the potential to accelerate progress towards implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and for us at the World Bank towards achievement of our twin goals. But we believe that for this to hold true, for this promise to be met, governments will need to take proactive measures to ensure these technologies are harnessed in a way that is inclusive, that leaves no one behind, that create opportunities for everyone in their societies to share in the benefits that they will create, the opportunities that they will create. It is not enough, we believe, that they generate economies of scale, that they generate efficiencies, that they decrease cost of goods and services. We believe that investment in human capital, in particular education and skills, the provision of social safety nets, investment in job creation matter just as much. Otherwise, there is a risk, as many have said before us, that technologies would actually lead to an increase rather than a decrease in inequality. Therefore, we want to focus this session on really understanding what will it take to get this duality of outcome, to make sure that disruptive technologies do generate opportunities for all in society. To do that, we will leverage two types of expertise. We will look at IEG's own understanding and assessment of strategies that can be put in place to enhance the inclusiveness of growth. And we will look at, or we will listen to the experience and expertise of a panel of outstanding experts and practitioners who have de facto used technological advances to promote a more inclusive development. Let me just say a few words on IEG's perspective, although you'll hear more from the panel on this as well. IEG actually believes, from its experience, from its evaluation, that the World Bank Group is uniquely positioned to support government in making sure that not only they harness the potential, the power of disruptive technologies, but also that they mitigate the risk thereof. We find that the World Bank is particularly helpful when it supports general policy advice to establish an environment supportive of digital technologies, disruptive technologies development, when it supports broad sectoral development and job creation, when it finances ICT investment, and when it supports the development of the private sector and innovation. However, we find that, and so these are strengths obviously that the World Bank can continue to leverage, but we also find that to do even better, the World Bank could, in a way, enhance its effort to pilot new technologies, new development approaches that embrace new technologies, or evaluations, and this is going to be highlighted again in a forthcoming evaluation on achieving inclusive development, inclusive growth, that's going to be shared with all of you after the annual meetings. We find that there's a relatively paucity of examples where the World Bank is really trying to use new technologies in its work. This mostly due to internal constraints linked to skills, to incentives, to lending pressures. The question, therefore, or one of the questions that we can ask is, how can we get a better trade-off between working with the tested and the secure and versus making room for more innovation? This question is even more important in today's environment where disruptive technologies are also disrupting the development landscape as we have been knowing it for the last 50 years or so, with more actors coming in and more development approaches and avenues for delivering development assistance being tested. So overall, whether it is by transforming the development landscape or by transforming potential development solutions, it is very clear that disruptive technologies offer huge opportunities to all of us development practitioners, but also huge potential challenges. So today, we want to focus the conversation on solutions, on the way forward. We want to ask questions such as, are there recipes for success? Are there models we can follow? Are there examples we can learn from? What can we do, we governments, officials, we in civil society, we in development institutions like us, or simply we as citizens? To help us and guide us through this discussion, we have a wonderful moderator, whom I'm not sure I see now, but I'm sure he's here, Ali Aslan. Ali is a well-known TV host, journalist, and presenter who's moderated events on economic, political, development issues all over the world. We're extremely grateful to have you, Ali. So with no further ado, let me ask you to join me in welcoming Ali. He will introduce the panel and guide us through the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for this very kind introduction, and delighted to be here in Bali for this very important meeting, Disruptive Technologies and Inclusive Development, What Works. For the next 90 minutes that we have left, we have assembled an esteemed panel here for you today, which will tackle exactly those questions of how to transform development in both positive, but of course there are also some negative ways, which of course we will talk about. The gentleman to my immediate left, he's the Vice President for Middle East and North Africa at the World Bank. He's also former Chief of Staff of World Bank President Jim Kim. Please welcome Ferit Belhaj. Right next to him, I'm delighted to welcome the professor and director of the Commitment to Equity Institute at Tulane University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nora Lustig. Yeah. This gentleman sitting right in the center, at least for the Indonesians amongst you, I think needs no introduction. He's the founder and CEO of Bukapalak, which of course is the largest marketplace in Southeast Asia. Achmad Zaky is here, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful to welcome the managing director of BRAC, which is a Bangladesh-based INGO. Lindsay Coates is here, ladies and gentlemen. And last but certainly not least, delighted to welcome the Director for Human Development at the Human Development and Economic Management Department at the Independent Evaluation Group, which Sophie has mentioned, at the World Bank. August Kwame is here, ladies and gentlemen. August Kwame, let me start right with you, because disruptive technology and inclusive development, that's your field. That's the field that you have been working on in the context of the independent evaluation group. What findings can you share with the audience today? What findings have you assembled throughout your studies and research?
Well, thank you, Ali. The field of disruptive technology is not new. We've traveled this road before, I should say. We've had, over the past 250 years, a number of industrial revolutions. Historians will tell us. They've been disruptive. They've changed ways of doing business, the ways in which societies live, interact, travel, communicate. And the technological revolution in which we are now, which is called the fourth industrial revolution by some, is not going to be very different. But some experts argue it is going to be quite different. Why? Because it's quite broad-based. It is affecting many aspects of our lives. It is going to affect more countries than any technological revolution before. So it's not going to be quite the same. We've seen the movie, but this episode is going to be quite disruptive, and there is a lot of anxiety around it. The good news is that the World Bank group has experience in working with countries in harnessing technology for development. The World Bank is likely to do more so going forward because technology is now everywhere, as I said. Looking at data over the past 14 years, the first part of that period indicates that about 1,300 projects approved by the World Bank had a technology component. In the following 7 years, that number went up to 2,300. So the World Bank is increasingly more involved in the field of technology. What we learn from evaluations, we've learned quite a lot. We've done a number of evaluations in that area. Let me just share with you 3 lessons. One is, as Sophie mentioned earlier, the World Bank has been at its best when working on policy advice, sectoral issues, jointly with IFC's investment in telecoms providers, for example, to change the landscape and bring more people into the field of telephony, for example. So that's a good experience to start with. The private sector can play an important role with the World Bank and perhaps through public-private partnerships, for example. The second findings, which I think is very, very important, is that the World Bank has been very effective also in working with firms, entrepreneurs, and industries in helping them become more productive, more competitive. However, I should say, we also find that this kind of support directed to firms, sectors, and industries has not had the kind of economy-wide impact that one will expect. So the World Bank has not been quite effective at using the synergy between its instruments and the synergy between its institutions, IFC, MIGA, and World Bank, to make that kind of economy-wide systemic impact on jobs and competitiveness and productivity for countries. The third lesson, and I'll stop here, is that the World Bank has been quite good at supporting research institutions and universities in developing countries to harness technology, to invest more in technology, and to do more in the field of research and innovation. However, this has not been inclusive, and it is a concern in that in focusing on quality and selectivity in working with these universities, the World Bank has not paid enough attention to including women in the field as well. And we think that it is possible to do both, to invest in quality research whilst at the same time in also paying attention to the inclusive aspect of technology.
All right, thank you so much, August Kwame, for offering the top 3 lessons that you have come up with. And the last point in particular leads me, of course, right to Lindsay Coates, because Bragg knows a thing or two about women, people left behind, but particularly also women left behind. As I said, a very valuable INGO based in Bangladesh. Lindsay, you have extensive experience from working with what we call the ultra-rich poor, the poor. The rich poor would be an interesting term that we're coining in Bali here in 2018. The ultra-rich poor. No, the very low-income, poor segments, of course, of society. That is the field that BRAC is focusing on at the end of the day. And we've heard so many times, it's also about not leaving people behind. And you're working with those who have left behind. What can you offer us? How do we ensure that we include these people into the transformation process?
That is critical. We're at a historic juncture where, because of technology, we are at risk of exacerbating a divide that I think almost anyone would find to be morally, socially unacceptable. So what's critical in working with these populations? I posit that the most important thing is to double down on slower technology and empathy in terms of dealing with these communities. So BRAC has lifted 6.9 million people through its ultra-poverty graduation program out of extreme poverty. And that is a significant number, but there are 400 million people across the globe in that category. 400 million. There are 800 million who are living at a level that is unacceptable. We've made progress, but we are at risk of leaving behind a large segment of that population. So what does empathy look like? That sounds like a great word. We can all be empathetic. I can be empathetic to you. I can be empathetic to you. What does it mean in this context? What BRAC has learned is that simply handing someone a phone is not going to do it. What is involved is a series of graduated intentional activities. So for example, in Kenya, in partnership with the government and BOMA and CARE, there's a program for financial inclusion and the use of technology. But the first thing that happens in that program, working with women, is a meal stipend. A meal stipend. If you can't eat, if you don't have a safe place to live, the rest of it is irrelevant. So what happens in that program with the government of Kenya is a meal stipend, financial training, and financial inclusion work, and then you move toward incorporating them into M-Pesa, which is a transformative technology in Kenya. It can sound like old news because it's not blockchain or artificial intelligence, but it's that foundational piece that's going to make the big difference in development.
Thank you so much. And we'll get, of course, more into detail as the discussion evolves, but I want to involve Ahmed here at this point, Achmad Zaky. Ahmed, according to a 2016 study by Google, Indonesia is set to become the fourth largest online market by 2020 with more than 100 million internet users. That's, of course, great news to you at the end of the day, because your company, Bukapalak, is considered one of Indonesia's top unicorns or top technology companies. Now, with that success comes great responsibility, of course. How are you personally managing the opportunities and risks that come with the disruptive technologies? Because that's what you are at the end of the day, a disruptor, no?
Yeah, I think there is a misconception about disruptive technology. Usually people think that disruptive is bad things, but I myself see disruptive is very, very good because it empowers everyone, including my competitor, the big giant company, the government itself. Right now they feel disrupted, and I think this is a very good movement, especially in Indonesia. Everyone right now feels disruptive. If you look at the top bank in Indonesia, the application is so good. They're hiring top talent, top engineering talent, and sometimes the startup, the new startup cannot compete with the giant because the giant feel disrupted because they already prepare for disruptive era. That's my first view, that this disruptive is very good and it empower. And the second, Bukalapak itself is right now we have 3 million SME. And technology bring open everything. I built the company 8 years ago. No one connect to the internet in Indonesia. But right now, my village, I come from village in Central Java. Right now, they already connect to the internet, and it's open anything. They just realized that they can sell online. The poor area in Central Java can sell online to a luxury apartment in Jakarta. It never happened before because if the transaction they do transaction offline, you will see the poor people usually in a dirty place, and then maybe you will feel, oh, I don't comfort with the place, something like that, or the face, the clothes. But through online, the poor people right now, they have a same opportunity as rich people. That's what I think is a very good thing happened in Bukalapak itself. Right now, they gather as one community, so it's like big giant cooperative. They fight together, they unify together to create prosperity. From my statistic, in 1 year, in average sellers in Bukalapak sell 2 times in average. So it means selling online is perform better than selling offline. So it means technology bring positive impact to small people, I think.
And an interesting anecdote that you shared with me is you knew that things were happening in Indonesia. You told me when the village of your mother founded their own WhatsApp group.
Yeah.
That's when things were starting to happen.
Yeah, and if there is bad thing in the village, they just upload anything. Oh, this is bad thing. Let's change it. Something like that. It empowers everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite. I can imagine it's quite a busy WhatsApp group over there. Professor Nora Lustig, great to have you with us as well. You, of course, are the director of the Commitment to the Equity Institute at Tulane University, which is dealing in many ways on the same topics that Lindsay is also tackling, of course, on economic development, poverty, inequality, and also want to touch upon the risk of people leaving behind this process that we, in this room at least, would deem generally positive. Talk about the risks a little bit. Talk about the risk of disruptive technology.
Yes, great, thank you. Because I mean, so far I'm hearing everything that, of course, is not disruptive because it's good. So it's welcome news. But I think that one of the concerns that disruptive technology has brought is the fact that it can generate a lot of labor displacement. So regardless of what happens to inequality, we don't know whether it's going to go up or down. What we know is that disruptive technology creates losers. Creates winners, but creates losers. And the issue is, are we equipped to deal with losers? Primarily now the losers are concentrated more in the advanced countries. But that has spillover effects, because in the advanced countries you have resistance to many things that are good for the developing world, like open trade, open migration, etc. So in the end, it also affects indirectly what happens to people's opportunities in the developing world. And frankly, I am not very optimistic that we know how to deal with the losers in, and loser, I don't mean losers derogatively. I mean they're people who had maybe a middle class position and suddenly they have not a job. If you give them a basic income, that's not going to deal with the problem because they were used to a middle class life. And that is something that's happening more and more, and it may happen more quickly than before. We don't know the extent to which. And when we look back, for example, what happened in the US with the process of people being left behind. A lot of people blame trade, even though it may be primarily technology. The US was not able to respond, and the way it's responded is not particularly welcome by many of us, right? So we have that issue that I think has not, I mean, everything sounded positive, but I don't see how are we going to deal. Two things. The losers are the ones that lose employment, but also maybe the employment generation as a result of the fact that labor is going to use less intensively with the new technologies, may also create less employment over time. I was asking before we came here to the public panel if we have an assessment of, broadly, what is the impact? Like now we know we have an assessment of what the issue is on the environment. We know that if we do not reduce by X amount the carbon emissions, you're going to have global warming to the extent that it will be destructive to the world. Well, we have another destruction maybe if we don't do anything with the groups of people who are not being benefited by the disruptive technology. And we just say Darwinianly, well, let's the fittest survive. Because that's, that's what's happened. You do not have a strategy to deal with the displaced. And I think that we should think about what works? And I don't think that, you know, I'm looking at the World Bank now. What, and the independent evaluation office of the World Bank, do we really know what works to deal with this phenomenon that's going to be accelerating very quickly in the world, and do it in a way that it's financially viable? That's my question to
that's a great question, and you've basically taken over my job at this particular point, which I fully appreciate. But no, indeed, Ferit Belhaj, the reason why, one of the reasons why we gave you the last word, at least in this particular first round, is indeed to give you an opportunity to listen to all sides and then come in with the World Bank perspective, because the responsibility that lays on your organization in this particular regard is not small. And as someone who was a former chief of staff to the president, for whom this particular subject matter is of great importance, how do you assess everything you've heard up until now?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me say that I agree with absolutely everything that was said, from Auguste all the way to the professor. And this shows how complex the situation is, and how many questions we have to answer to ourselves, and obviously to the people that we are supposed to be serving. Let me take a step back and look at the region that I am responsible for right now, and then I will enlarge the conversation.
I apologize to interrupt. Is the microphone, can you hear Ferit Belhaj? So. Is the microphone working? See?
Is it?
Perhaps a bit closer.
How about yeah.
There you go. Wonderful.
Better. All right.
Wonderful.
New tech.
Disruptive technology right here.
Yeah. Exactly. It's disrupting my speech.
Oh, there you go. Well, the term disruption comes in many shapes and forms, you know.
See that, yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm taking a step back. I've been talking to some of the economists with whom I am interacting on a daily basis. By current trend, by 2050, the Middle East and North Africa region, meaning from Morocco to Iran and everything in between, will be looking at about 350 million job seekers, young people, knocking at the door of the job market. A job market that is today not that conducive. So we're looking at seeing this and talking to some of the governments and some of our quote-unquote clients. And they are asking us, okay, what can we do? How can we manage this huge opportunity? Because that's the way we want to look at it. It is a huge opportunity. Well, we will manage it and we'll look at it through various lenses. One is obviously to increase what we have been doing in terms of education. And this is the initiative that the president of the World Bank, Jim Kim, is going to be launching, I guess, tomorrow. This is a human capital project that is going to be, to a very large extent, shaking up some of our certainties when it comes to education and health and the impact on development. The second part of the conversation relates to who and how can we finance development? Where can we get the trillions of dollars that are needed for the developing world to move away from poverty, to move into this whole broad concept of shared prosperity? Those trillions of dollars are not going to be coming from the World Bank, not from the other multilateral development banks. They're going to be coming from the private sector. And we need to have that very, very deep conversation with the private sector. And the third point is new technologies. Because whether we like it or not, the train has already left the station. And new technologies are now part of our lives. They're not new anymore, by the way. They are evolving on a daily basis, but they're not new. What Zaky was mentioning earlier regarding the fact that you go to any place around the world, from Manhattan to any shanty town, people have their devices. People are interconnected. People are talking. People are getting information. People are seeing what the others are doing and how they are living. And that really, both instill them with energy because they want to do more and better, but also with a lot of frustration if they cannot do that. So how can we manage that whole dynamic? Now, the way we have chosen to do it when it comes to MENA, Middle East and North Africa, is really to move on leapfrogging our get MENA to get to a new economy. We cannot keep following what has been done yesterday. We cannot be looking at the 20th century as the model. Industrialization is something that is good, but that is not enough. We are not going to be going to the place where we should be going by just looking at the old recipes. So we are going to be, and we have already started, talking to our governments, telling them that there is a need to restructure their economies, restructure their broad policies, enable rather than do. Enable those who can actually do through new technologies rather than do and in fact stifle innovation and stifle creativity. So this is where we are going. We can go into more details, but I can give you a couple of quick examples. Take my own country, Tunisia. Lately, Tunisia adopted the Startup Act, a very interesting piece of legislation. Absolutely not perfect, but a step forward. When I visit with all the countries that I am interacting with, I meet with governments. They are still getting into their normal way of reasoning. And then you meet with people start-uppers, young people who are actually taking in their own hands their destiny and thinking that, you know what, we can do so much using these new technologies. Do exactly what Zaky was mentioning, getting out of those pre-established frameworks. And this is where the bank can come and can help. The bank can come and help in advising in terms of reviewing the regulatory parameters of this new economy, so that investors can both be secure, but at the same time, so creators or people who have that sense of inventing something new can feel deconstrained. So that's the kind of balance that we are trying to strike. And I believe that this is the only way forward. Now, the risks are there, and I fully agree, and this is part of the questions we should ask ourselves. How far can we go? How can we mitigate those risks? Because we need to adapt and mitigate. And this is not just for climate. It's also for technology, and I fully agree with you.
All right, thank you so much, Ferry Belhaj, for the World Bank view. Nora Lustig, you listened very carefully what Ferry had to say. Are you persuaded? Are you convinced?
Well, I think that in terms of creating the ability of people to benefit from the new technology, then that's, the focus has to be on equipping people to be able to be part of the labor market. The new demands in the labor market, of course, are going to be helping people who are equipped. The point is, again, what do you do with those who are displaced? I mean, those are becoming important political movements everywhere. And they are moving also the world in the direction probably we don't want to see, because it's a direction in which there is resistance to the things that are part of the postmodern world that would lead to greater prosperity. And I think we, even in the countries that have lots of resources, like the US, they have not been able to come up with a strategy to deal with those who are left behind. By left behind, I mean not that you are, temporarily unemployed, or it's the fact that you are maybe permanently displaced because there's nothing that will replace what you were doing before, and the only way out may be migration for some people who can. But what do you do with the rest? And I don't think we have a strategy. We don't even have an assessment of the extent to which this may happen. And what are the measures that you can use that will work as mitigators? And I just want to say one thing, when I talk about, you were thinking about the disruptive technology in the way that I like to think in the utopian world. The utopian world would be one in which everything gets produced through technology. You don't need labor anymore. It's a world without scarcity. Do you think we would have a way to actually deal with distribution? Because that would be the big challenge. So it would be great to have that world, but then, how do you distribute the goodies? Now we're not there, but we are in a situation in which in parallel you have huge pockets of amazing productivity with those left behind. Those who have the amazing productivity obviously make a lot of income. Probably you're one of them. But do you feel responsible that you have to use your own income and wealth that you're creating to actually compensate those who were not able to benefit or even were hurt by the transformation. So that's, you know.
And we're already in the midst of a very temperament discussion here, and I do want to involve at this particular point, of course, Zaky, Lindsay, and August. But Ferit, you had a very, very quick intervention.
No, a very quick one. Very good questions. Part of the answers, small part of the answers, may lie in the World Bank World Development Report for this year, The Future of Work. It may be, interesting to take a look at it and see to what extent you could find some satisfaction in some of those analyses. Obviously incomplete because things are evolving so fast.
Thank you so much. Zaky, indeed, I mean, you were called upon personally. Your Bukapalak, of course, is a great success story, not just for Indonesia, but the whole region. But with that, as we said, comes responsibilities at the end of the day. What are you personally doing to ensure that those we have called left behind here on this particular panel for the poor and marginalized groups in Indonesia, how do you make sure to create opportunities for them as well?
Yeah, we stated in our, the first important thing is we stated in our company mission and purpose that our purpose is to fight inequality. So we fight for poor, small business people. And that's very clear that my staff, I have like 2,500 right now. They are wake up in the morning and they don't feel work. They feel they are going to heaven. Because we have such a good mission. I think the mission, our purpose of the company is very important. That's the reason why customer, not just small business, also choose our brand. I think right now with the technology and digitalization, where everything is open, the customer have a larger portion. They have food, so they choose the brand who have a very good purpose. I think purpose is very, very important for a company, and it has to be clear statement to all of the staff and all of the people, because it's a commitment. That's a Bukapalak commitment. Right now, we are building a second wave. I call it second wave of e-commerce. Right now, we build e-commerce for a rural area. I have like 300,000 warung or mom and pop store. This is very beautiful because we target specifically to the bottom of 80% of Indonesia who don't have a bank account, is really cashless. They only have like $100 in hand, in cash to make money. Is very beautiful model because in terms of margin, actually the small business make more margin actually. It's profitable because they don't have collateral. The finance company cannot help them because they don't have collateral. But actually, if this is my second point, with the technology and digitalization, there is data. Right now, the government don't have data. If you ask the government of Indonesia, do you have data about poor people? No. They have no idea how to spend the money, the budget. The budget is inefficient, I think, because they don't have data. They just pour money they depend on people in that province, something like that, and it's so inefficient. With the data, my vision is I have data about poor people, 200 people, that how they transact, and this data can be very important. The first one is for financing, because right now they don't have collateral, but with the data, we can actually, they are very trustworthy. If you look at the data, they are performing well, their business is doing good because they use the money to their kids. They don't have a big asset. That's why we need to help them. So the second is for advising them. Right now we are building AI to help them. Hey, you have to do this. You have to do this, something like that. We built a small, very simple assistant to help them to be more empowered, smarter than the big guys, because they are not going to university maybe, but using the application, we can advise them, hey, you have to doing this business, and then they can be smarter. I think I'm very optimistic. I'm utopia. Yeah, I mean, my vision is we work less in the future, 50 years, we work less, we are more happy, and then people make same money. Yeah, same money. So that's my dream, and this is the dream of the company.
So we learned happy employees and happy customers at Bukalapak.
Yeah.
That's the key. But in all earnest, I think the point you conveyed here, especially your appeal to the Indonesian government, has been heard loud and clear here at this particular point. Lindsay Coates, I wanted to give you an opportunity to also respond to Farid's statements about the position of the World Bank. Lindsay, what is your experience as someone who is working in this particular field? How's the World Bank coming in here? How is it being helpful?
The bank is doing, I think, some significant things in this space, but of course, because I'm from civil society, I think it should do more, because we're never satisfied. So we are disruptive by nature. So a couple of points. I think the WDR, for example, didn't really take on the problem of the informal sector. It talks a lot about jobs, and there's, to me at least in reading it, there is an assumption that everybody can get a job. And what we're really talking about when we talk about leaving no one behind are people who are in the informal sector, and they're going to need different kinds of policy solutions to bring them in. And then the other thing is, I think the bank does have a capacity around data, but it is maybe underutilized in two ways. One way in which I would say it may be underutilized is I recently saw, I think in the context of UNGA, a statistic to the effect of those in fragile states. We don't have data on 82% of the poor in that context. 82% of the people who are living in fragile contexts, who are the most vulnerable by virtue of just where they happen to be born, we don't know anything about them. So the point, Zaky, about data is really, really important. The other way in which the bank could lead around data is we can collect data all day long, but if we cannot use data, if it is not meaningful for decision makers and policymakers, then it's pointless. So there was an interesting study that Development Gateway did about a month ago, which talks about the scope of responsibility and government policymakers' use of data. So I think the bank has a policy opportunity both in terms of collecting data and then the incentives for use of data. Is the data useful? Is it meaningful? Because if we don't have that synergy between the information and the people making decisions, and then if we're not having enough data on the people we want to serve, we're not going to make this at all. And I want to also underline, I think, Nora's points about the U.S. government has lots of data on its labor force, tons of data, knows what's happening, and the U.S. government has not managed the transition at all.
August Kwame, both Lindsay and Zach, of course, touched upon data and data collection. Now, in your opinion, working with so many countries and overviewing their development, how can countries, at the end of the day, enhance their data collection and monitoring systems? Well, what has your studies and research found in this particular regard?
Yeah, thanks, Zaky. We actually did an evaluation recently on data for development. It's on IAG's website. If you have time to look at it, I will encourage you to do so. What we found is that, of course, we looked at the World Bank role in working with countries, and we found that the World Bank was actually quite good at helping countries build a capacity for creating data, for producing data. But as Lindsay said, the bank has not been very effective at helping countries disseminate and use the data. So there is a gap there. The bank's support to countries has not been user-centric. It has been mostly on the production side. What we also found was that countries and the bank have not focused on the new sources of data that Achmad talked about. Big data is almost absent from the bank's and countries' program. There is a wealth of data out there that is not being used, is not being tapped. Geospatial data is not being used effectively. So what we recommended in this evaluation and in other evaluations is first, the bank and countries should organize their data system to focus more on usage, and the government should also enhance data transparency. And the government should also adopt the new kind of data that is being used out there. The government should become more digital. Private sector is more digital today. Firms are digital. So how do you collect taxes if you're not in the same space as firms? If you are using traditional data, you're going to miss a lot of firms that should pay taxes. You're not even going to know about their existence. You're not going to have enough information on their business, on their revenues. And we know firms are very good at also hiding information. So the government should become digitalized as firms are, as workers are. And the government should use big data on workers too. The WGR, Farid mentioned the WGR. The WGR is recommending that countries think about providing universal social security, for example, or universal income. How is the government going to do that if you don't have data on 82% of the poor? It's not, so the government needs to invest more in data. And we looked at how government used traditional data, for example, in assessing the inclusiveness of their policies. To do that, you need several data points. You need several household surveys. And our information suggests that only 50% of countries have enough household surveys over a period of 15 years to look at how policies are influencing the inclusiveness of society, how the income distribution is changing. And this 50% it's quite low, but if you look at it from region to region, in Africa, it's only 27% of countries that have enough household survey to monitor the impact of policies and technology on inclusiveness. So there is a lot to do there. I'm glad to hear from Ahmed that the private sector is actually doing some of the job that the World Bank, is supposed to do. So that's great. But there is enough space left for the World Bank, and we hope that going forward there will be more activities in that space.
Work sharing at its best. Nora Lustig, I think you wanted to directly respond. Did I get you?
No, I was just thinking about the data probably is counter in your region than in any other, right? In the Middle East and North Africa, very scarce in order to be tracking, and I just wanted to comment on that. But let me ask a question to you. The data that you're producing, is it going to be publicly available and free?
No. Okay. But if the government can collaborate, I think right now it's not happened yet, but in the future, for example, like tax, the government always asking about tax, but hey, why don't we work together to create more tax policy for small business, and then let's do like experiments, something like that, because the government is not familiar with, we call it A/B testing. In technology, we call it A/B test. We can test a policy in a small group. Let's see how it goes. If the policy is good, then let's continue, something like that. Because if the tax is too high, then the small business cannot be as competitive as big company. That's one of the example. But right now, we are working with the government.
Clearly, you are a visionary, long-term thinker when it comes to this particular topic. Is the Indonesian government reaching out to you? Are they seeking your advice?
Yes, but right now the policy is not happened yet. Still a lot of debate about taxing the small business, small people, because they cannot reach the offline transaction, so they use online. But we say, hey, it's not fair. Why? Oh, you tax online. It's same people, but you don't tax offline. So there is unfairness in there because they don't tax offline. Why they tax online? So we still figure it out how to solve this problem.
It's become very evident that we have a great deal of expertise here on the panel, but I also know we have a great deal of expertise here in the audience, which I would like to make use of. For that, we have microphones placed on both sides of the aisle. So if you want to chime in, if you want to get involved at any particular point in this discussion, please feel free to approach any of these microphones on the left and right and contribute to the discussion, preferably with a question. Ferit Belhash, we heard even here the sentiments range from very optimistic to cautiously optimistic to somewhat not pessimistic but skeptical, perhaps. How do you think? How do we get everyone on board here?
Well, let me first say that we cannot afford to be pessimistic. There's no other way. We need to move on this. And let me give you a few examples. You mentioned that before this, I was a chief of staff for Jim, but before that, I was dealing with the Mashrek countries, a number of countries that were going through terrible, terrible, terrible time. You know, the Syria crisis, Iraq, etc., and the refugees. New technologies helped us tremendously when it came to dealing with the refugee crisis. When it came for us to engage with all of these people, you know, thrown out of their houses, of their homes, and basically spread all over Lebanon and Jordan. It was extremely helpful for us when it came to help their kids get a decent education so that we don't find ourselves in front of a lost generation. When it came for us to help them get health, when it came for us to help them through smart cards get access to basic goods. When the time came for us to engage after ISIS started to be defeated in Iraq, and reconstruction became the order of the day. Well, you know what? New technology helped us tremendously move in all of these areas that were just delivered from ISIS' grip, and we went there to rebuild, not to rebuild, you know, it wasn't just brick and mortar, it's also to rebuild the social fabric of a country that was hurt so bad. For that, networks and new techs and you know, all of these devices that we've been using and digital payments helped us tremendously. So this is the reality of things. It's not just, you know, living in La La Land and thinking that, you know, everybody will be, you know, living happily after, you know, because they would have access to new technologies. New technology is actually helping people go about a very, very, very tough life when they are dealing with fragility, with conflict. Look at the disastrous effects of climate change. In one previous life, I was in the Pacific, looking at countries being basically submerged by the sea. Okay, we help them keep in touch with each other. We help them through a number of technological solutions so that they could actually detect when, you know, a tsunami would be coming. We helped them change the way they lived so that they could go into places where, you know, the impact of sea rising would be less dangerous for them. So we have put a new technology to good work. And I believe this is, you know, part and parcel of what the bank is doing. It's not just, you know, no, it's important to create jobs, etc., and to look at the future, but it's also very important to put the new technology, to put disruptive technologies to good work when it comes to, you know, the basic dimensions of development.
And to be more inclusive, of course, is not just a topic of this particular panel, but the challenge at hand, how to make it more inclusive, how to bring everyone on board. Lindsay Coates, well, what has your experience has shown? What is working? Because that's the question that we want to address here. What works? What is working?
That's a very hard question because I don't think there's enough that's working. A few days ago, I was in Cox's Bazar, and that is one of the massive tragedies that is not being paid enough attention to. And I realize it's not the bank's core remit because it's a humanitarian event, but you have an extremely poor part of Bangladesh with a population of about 300,000 people. And the estimates vary, but about 1.1 million have moved in with them in a climate vulnerable setting. Where people are living in circumstances that are inhumane. And it's very difficult to see where technology fits. Now, I could think forward, because I've worked in the humanitarian space in my old job, I could think forward about ways in which it could work. And some of that has to do with how donors behave. So in development and humanitarian settings, traditional donors are often reluctant to support the kind of systems change that we need. So for example, delivery of services to people. Right now, supply chains for most private humanitarian agencies are nowhere near what they need to be. UPS and FedEx can do way better. So if we can get, you know, packages to people, why can't we use things like blockchain to get funds to people in an accountable, systemic kind of way? But I think there's a leadership role for the bank and for donors to actually support that systems change, because we can talk about this as an abstraction, but unless we really unpack how we're delivering services to people, because that's the other end of it. How do we connect individuals to the technology? But then what do we do in terms of service delivery? Because as Jim Kim has said, it's not just a matter, it's not what we need to do, because we know that, it's how are we doing it. And there's really an unexploited space there that there have been good pilot programs, the bank has funded, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have funded, but it's not yet at the level that it needs to be, so that the people in Cox's Bazar can see something different in their lives.
Nora, do you want to build upon Lindsay's remarks on what works or what could work?
Actually, if you allow me, I think, let me move a little bit the context of the discussion, because I don't think we're talking about, I don't think the disruptive adjective to technology has been dealt with enough. I don't think anybody's questioning that technology can do amazing things in terms of transformation of people's lives. I think what we are trying to address here is the disruptive part of the new technology. And the disruptive part of the new technology has to do with the labor market primarily. It has to do, will you actually have people not able to work in places and maybe not find another job, and also new demands in terms of skill mix. So the strategies that I would ask for them from the multilaterals in terms of how are they addressing this is primarily, so what are you doing to actually make sure that people will have the skills for the new jobs? And maybe you were saying that you're doing some things in the private sector within the confines of your company, but there has to be a strategy which has to be systematic from the World Bank's point of view, because this is going to be huge. So every country needs to be able to respond to the new demands. So how are we going to deal with it? Maybe this human capital strategy will have. And the second one is, so where are the safety nets and the monies to pay for the safety nets for those who are not going to be able to be part of it? We have to be, even if you're very optimistic, we have to be realistic that there are people who are going to be left behind, left aside. So how are we going to deal with that? Both from a humanitarian point of view, but also from a political and social stability point of view. Yeah. That's the key. So
very good questions. Let's direct them right to the responsible parties here, Ferit and August here, or Zaky, of course.
Of course, technology. I must say that technology is a good thing, but also have a bad thing. For example, like there is a debate that one offline marketplace, I think some offline marketplace in Jakarta closed down because of Bukalapak. Yeah, that's some people say that, oh, that's a bad thing about technology, something like that. And the taxi driver also moving to Uber, and then the offline taxi driver is lost the job. But my response to that case is always, yeah, this is the cool thing about technology, about disruption. People feel, I don't know, the world is so boring if we don't make a competition, something like that. And some offline seller, they move to Bukalapak. Some of them still insist that offline is doing good. That's okay. But yeah, it's choice for the seller. Are they going to move online or are they still offline? The offline itself, I saw some offline marketplace, they transforming to entertainment business, because transactional right now moving to online. So they are changing actually. That's my point about how disruption is very good, because I saw many people changing their behavior because of, maybe the bad things is sometimes the disruption come really quick and then make a crisis, something like that. So people are not prepared. Yeah, for that point, I cannot say anything. The government must come and then help them. I mean, in finding job or something like that. But I don't think the technology revolution will come so quick. It's coming, yeah. AI, for example, is not coming this year. Maybe 20 years or 50 years. You guys have to ready for it. So that's for example.
A very Darwinistic approach, but get ready at the end of the day, because change is coming, change is inevitable. As Ferit also said, the train has left the station, whether some of us may embrace it or not. Ferit and August, Nora had raised some good questions and points. Do you want to address them?
Yes. Oh, yeah, thanks, Ali. You know, a famous economist, Joseph Schumpeter, coined the term creative destruction. So this technology is going to be disruptive, but it's going to create opportunities too, as we've said on the panel already. It all depends on what we do with it. I think we have more control over the usage of new technologies than we tend to think. You know, it all depends on what we want to do with it. So in the context of inclusive development, for example, how can we use disruption or disruptive technology to make development more inclusive? This is the question posed to us.
What would be your answer?
Yeah, well, first, based on our evaluations, and I will also speak from that perspective, government can use disruptive technology to make service delivery more efficient, more effective. We've seen, for example, in Rwanda, they're using drone to deliver blood package to rural areas. I mean, it can be done, right, by more countries. We're seeing in Bangladesh, Bcash is helping people have access to money without having a bank account. We've seen that with M-Pesa also in Kenya and in some other African countries. The bank is using drone now to supervise some of its projects, the World Bank. So disruptive technology can be used to deliver services, to have more information on how projects are doing, and also to help countries participate more in the economy. From the inclusiveness point of view, people have to participate in the growth process. They don't have to wait till growth happens to receive money from the government. So the bank is focusing also in bringing people in participating in the growth process, in bringing their own asset, whatever those assets are, to contribute to the growth process. And disruptive technology can be used to facilitate that process because people are more informed. People can use their cell phone now, sitting in a village, to participate in economic activities. Third, disruptive technology can also be used to share information and protect our rights, right? We know cybersecurity is upon us. Government can get into that space too, to become more agile, more knowledgeable about technology, to protect human rights, to protect the right of the poor. There are a lot that government can do to make this whole process inclusive, more efficient for all of us. The question is, are governments ready? Are governments agile enough? Are they aware enough? And is the World Bank ready to bring expertise to the table? We can talk a lot about disruptive technology, but do we have the expertise in the World Bank to do that? Is it an area where the bank has invested enough in human skills, in human capital? When we looked at big data, for example, we realized in the bank there are actually no experts in big data. We have a lot of statisticians on traditional data. We have no expert on big data. So how do we get involved in that space if we don't have the expertise? So these are questions that we're finding in our evaluations. We don't have all the answers. We can come up with findings, lessons, recommendations. It's up to all of us to act on those findings.
And before I give Ferit the chance to add to what you said, again, want to repeat my offer to you to chime in this debate. There are microphones on the left and right. So I see a gentleman already. Please take your positions at the microphone. I will call upon you in just a moment. Ferit, perhaps the World Bank's position here and responsibilities again.
But it's also always an awesome responsibility to give the World Bank's position. We don't have a position. We have many positions and many ways of looking at a very, very fast-evolving industry, fast-evolving reality. It would not come as a surprise if I said that I agree with absolutely everything Auguste mentioned. when we talk about disruption here, it's not disrupting my quiet. It's really disrupting something that is now becoming obsolete. And we need to move forward. As a few weeks ago, a few colleagues of mine and I went to the Silicon Valley. And we went there, we basically immersed ourselves in all of these new industries, people doing interesting stuff. And actually, the most interesting part of that was to meet with people from the Middle East and North Africa who are there, basically taking, their knowledge and their creativity from San Francisco, from Palo Alto, all the way to the Middle East and North Africa. It was a very interesting conversation with them. What they told us, something that we obviously suspected, but it's interesting to get it from them directly. We are going back to our countries where the regulatory framework is either non-existent or very constraining. Can you, World Bank, help us in loosening those constraints, deconstraining our industry? So this is one, going back to what Auguste was mentioning. How can the bank engage with governments through expertise, whether it is existing within the bank or expertise that you can import from where the industry is, and help these countries adapt to the new realities that are surrounding them. At the same time, and part of the conversation we had in San Francisco were with people who were saying, watch it. You are looking at very, very real risks here. Risks in terms of monopolies, risks when it comes to protection of data, et cetera, et cetera. And this is also something that we should be looking at very, very carefully. So we are not getting into this new universe, naively and looking at it as if it were free of danger. Obviously, whatever we do as we move forward in this very, very fluid industry, we need to be very much alert and aware that things can go wrong. That's why, as a bank, as a public institution, we need to make sure that while engaging on this new way of promoting a new economy, we also need to make sure that we are protecting those vulnerable, those who possibly could be left behind. We need to find, a balance, and we need to make sure that we can manage those tensions.
Thank you so much, Farid. Please chime in. Please introduce yourself quickly, and we're happy to hear your question. I think the microphone is not turned on yet. Should work now.
Okay, I think it might be now. I just want to solicit your views.
Could you introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, my name is Patrick Blott, and I'm the CEO of Intermap Technologies. We're a publicly traded global geospatial company, and we work with well over 50 or 60 countries around the world and have for over 20 years, particularly in areas of data infrastructure. And so my question to the group, just listening to some of the feedback and reacting to it, is that I've heard that some private companies have better financial data about the vast majority of citizens than the government. I've heard that logistics companies like Federal Express and others are capable of providing services efficiently in many ways better than the public sector. So my question is specifically with respect to P3s, public-private partnerships, in areas of technology where the assets are less tangible. We're not building a toll road, but we're building very important strategic data infrastructure. And I just wonder if you have thoughts about how to include the private sector in that process, where maybe, I know as the CEO of a data company that we have better data than many governments in many areas of the world, how to enlist the private sector to be helpful and advance the ball down the field through P3s. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Is your question directed to anyone in particular?
It's not directed to anyone in particular, but I have heard from all five of your participants about how the private sector is needed, whether it's capital. We have access to capital through public markets, but the public sector has the ability to allocate.
Right.
So without the ability to allocate, that's not helpful. So I'm just wondering about people's thoughts in involving the private sector, perhaps through P3 structures.
All right, thank you so much. Who would like to answer that? Who would like to tackle that? August, why don't you get started, and then Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I will just start because I don't think I have the full answer. But yeah, we have done some evaluations on PPP, public-private partnerships, not specifically in the area of technology, but we also know quite a bit about technology through other evaluations as well, to suggest that in this era of disruptive technology, there is no actor in the economy that can do it alone. And the government is the least well-positioned actor to embrace and deliver disruptive technology to everyone because it requires so much. It requires new infrastructure, as you said. It requires investment in human capital from early childhood to later in life. It requires partnership in regulation. It required partnerships among countries to share data for cybersecurity. So this is a field where PPP, public-private partnership, is a must. And there is such data generated by the private sector. Just, in this room, we're all generating data. If you have a cell phone with you, you're sending signals. You're generating data. We know, everybody, Google knows where we all are today, but I'm not sure there is any government in the world that knows exactly where we all are. So public-private partnership is really a must, and we've seen that it works in telecoms. And the bank, sorry for repeating that, the bank is really well positioned to do that because the bank has, several institutions within the bank group. IBRD works with the public sector. IFC works very efficiently with the private sector, with private companies like yours. MIGA works also with the private sector. So if the World Bank brings synergy between these institutions, then the World Bank can help government also work in a coordinated fashion with the private sector and with the global private sector as well.
Right, thank you so much. Lindsay Coates?
Yeah. I'm underline his point because I'm in total agreement with Auguste on this. Last week, Google and BRAC launched an app called Como in Bangladesh, and its purpose is to match informal sector workers with informal sector employers. So it's linked in for a group that's underserved. It doesn't involve the Bangladeshi government, and that's unfortunate. And I think the government wants people to be employed. I mean, that's a government interest, but the systems do not support that kind of activity, and I think that what Auguste is talking about is that's the shift we need in terms of how systems operate to really realize the kind of change that we want.
Right, thank you so much. Does anyone else want to chime this in? Otherwise, go ahead, Zach.
Right now we are working with the finance minister, Bu Sri Mulyani, in spreading the capital to small business. They have a huge budget in subsidy the small business with we call it KUR. It's a micro credit with a very small interest rate, something like that. And I think it's one of example. Hopefully it work very well. The government use our data, and then we get the advantage from that, and also the government also work with other platform. But hopefully it can happen because the government is very hard for government to spread the money to a small business. Is very high cost in Indonesia, but using technology. It can be much cheaper, hopefully. But let's see. It's still experiment with the government. Hopefully the result is very good.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks for your question. Next gentleman, please. Please introduce yourself.
Muhtasim Yusuf Badri, Senior Economist, General Manager of Kisanadet Department, Central Bank of Sudan. It's a question and an experience to be shared also at the same time as a comment. This direct to Lindsay and Professor Lustig. Disruption is not restricted only to technology. In economics, we have reforms, you have policies, that's also disruptive. But at the end of the day, it comes with a good result. and they are applied. I could sense a hidden call for prioritization from Lindsay and Lustig, saying if there is no food, no shelter, rest is irrelevant. And Lustig is worried about the displacement. So technology itself could bring about food and shelter. And we have an experience in Sudan, in remote villages, people did not have food, did not have shelters. They have been trained and brought a technology that can use the leaves and the branches of trees, and they have managed to manufacture coal. So that has led to earning the food and a shelter at the same time. The experience of the Chinese, the father of the hybrid rice of the Chinese, Mr. Zing something, I don't know the full name of it, has managed to double the production of the rice from the same acres of land with the technology. So do you think by having this in mind, we still need to have an idea of how to get around the outcomes of technology? For instance, to build the capacities, to manage technology, to maintain the technology. Could that dispel the fear of the prioritization you're calling for? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much for your question. Nora Lustig and Lindsay Coates were addressed. Nora, you wanna start?
Yeah, I had a little bit of difficulty hearing, but I think that if I understood correctly, and correct me if I didn't, that there seems to be a misinterpretation of what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have all these wonderful technologies being used to good purposes. I think that that's not what I'm saying. I am, all for it. And I think that the world is a fantastically different and better place thanks to all the technological innovations that we've seen in the last 2 centuries. What I'm saying is that when I look at the word disruptive here, I'm thinking of the side that we need to cope with, that is going to be inevitable. Probably not so much in the poorest parts of the world in which you can use the new technologies for the better, but in the advanced economies and in the middle-income economies. That's the kind of challenge we have to deal with. The labor displacement is more common there. And I'm saying, as if I'm looking at this issue, I want to know what is it that we're planning to do to deal with the disruption. The disruption will have effects not only for the people who are suffering during the transition, but that creates new dynamics, socially and politically, that can then have spillover effects that affect the developing world and the poorest people of the world. So that was my point. And I think it's not an either or. It is, this is happening, and this is great. All the good things that are happening with the new technologies. The costs are also there. So how do we deal with the costs?
All right, thank you so much. Lindsay?
Yeah, I think that it's very easy. Technology seems so intimate to us. We're carrying a cell phone. It's like we love it. We wake up in the morning, it's the first thing we look at. So for us in this room, technology is an intimate and known thing. And I think that the challenge is that how do you make that accessible and available to people for whom it's not meant for them because they can't be marketed to. And I think that how we use, it's not that we shouldn't use technology, it's how we use it. So you look at something like the Green Revolution, more people are fed because of that. That was a technology breakthrough. And again, it's the same thing. How do we use it? How do we use it in a way that promotes human connection and brings more people in? Because if we don't do that, then because the speed of technology is going to exacerbate inequality and make it happen faster, and that's a scary thing.
Thank you so much. And indeed, the cell phone is the very first thing I'm looking at when I wake up. It's a very bad habit I'm trying to shake. Taking in the last 2 questions, please, the gentleman.
Hi, my name is Jordan. I'm a youth delegate from New
It's a
Zealand.
bit louder, please.
My name is Jordan. I'm a youth delegate from New Zealand, and on behalf of an organization called Aotearoa Youth Leadership Institute. My question is, this talk mentioned a lot on how important it is to have data to make good policy and how there is currently a lack of good data in developing countries. I'd like to ask the panel their views on the ways that data on the population in developing countries owned by the government or the private sector can be protected and not misused. Considering how there has been a lot of scandals this year in advanced economies on data exploitation such as Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and also what are the panel's thoughts on massive big data systems such as China's social credit system, and if they're beneficial on development or intrusive on people's privacy?
Is there anyone's view you would like to hear particularly on that?
I guess just the general panel's view. Yeah.
All right. Looking at the panel, who would like to address the one? Zaky,
Oh, yeah.
You seem to be well suited to take this one.
I mean, yeah, we have a very clear policy to our user that we don't share the data to everyone except for, I mean, if because the government control everything, right? I mean, if they ask data, if we don't give and then we go to jail, then we give it, something like that. Because
that seems like a very easy choice to make. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, we have to follow the rule. For example, like terrorism, there are some terrorists who bought products in the chemists in Bukalapak. Yeah. So we have to give them the data. But for the project that I mentioned, we partnership with the finance minister. We don't provide the very detailed. We just provide. I mean, this user is very good according our credit, your criteria and our criteria. We give this, something like that. We don't give the data, but we have like a common understanding our criteria. This checklist. This is a good small business. You can give the money, something like that. It's clear.
All right. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Briefly, Augustine?
Very briefly, just to add that what government should do is to become as good as the private sector in, understanding data breaches. Statistics show that only 20% of countries in Africa have any cybersecurity policy in place, and cybersecurity cost, 3 billion to Africa in 2017. Right. So it's a lot of money wasted. There are also security issues, as you said. The only way the government can protect all of us is to invest in policies and also expertise to understand when the private sector breaches your data. You need to know that it's happening. For you to know, you need to be an expert. So government should become good at it as well and invest in those skills within government agencies.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the question as well. Last question, please. You need to step closer to the microphone. We can't hear you.
Sorry. My leg is cramping because I went running.
I'm afraid a little closer.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right.
Hi. There you go.
All right. My name is Drew Wade. I'm from Chicago. I'm a private investor with a company called Band One. Specifically, we have a digital asset called DiviBlock. And in the process, we keep hearing, we see on the forefront that data, everybody knows data is, the new commodity. And specifically data being views, particularly with all the handsets that everybody has, around the world in this room and elsewhere. My question is that if that's the case, and you already see that a lot of these big companies are already trading on those views, and capital markets are already, allocating funding, specifically even liquidity and loans and things like that to facilitate their everyday businesses, what role does, be it the World Bank, IMF, or any of these large financial institutions that are already providing these, these funding to these larger companies, what would it take, or what role can they do to actually get that into the hands of, the small and medium-sized enterprises, specifically, the mom and pop organizations, which are obviously a major portion of that, engine for growth for any economy around the world.
Right, thank you. Lindsay, no, August?
I'm looking at everybody else.
There you go.
I'm looking at everybody else.
There you go. You got everyone puzzled here. It's, no. Augustine, perhaps you want to tackle that briefly?
Yeah, you give us food for thought. The government have access to all companies, big and small, as long as they decide to work with those companies. In the World Bank, we have the IFC working with companies, generally, mid-sized companies operating in developing countries. So the IFC can help, the large companies work with small companies, share data, and make data, work for mom and pop companies as well. But I think you're giving us food for thought. I don't have a clear, comprehensive answer on that, but your point is well taken, which is that data produced by a large company has to be used by everyone, not just sitting in the coffers of those large companies.
All right, thank you so much. Now, this panel is about to wrap up. We only have a few minutes left. But before we do, maybe get everyone 30 seconds each very quickly, some last thoughts, something you haven't gotten off your chest yet and would like to, or some thoughts and ideas moving forward. August, why don't we start the other way around? And August, why don't you kick us off for the last round?
Okay, so I'll end where I started, which is that, this is supposedly the fourth industrial revolution. So it's like being on a highway. This is supposedly the fourth industrial revolution, right? We have had 3 before. So it's like being on a highway with 4 lanes. So we're traveling much faster than when we used to have only 1-lane highway at the beginning of the 19th century. So we're traveling much faster, which means, we can arrive more quickly. But there are also more risks because the speed is higher, and risks, have been highlighted here by Nora and many others. So the question now is, how do we use the new technology, to mitigate the risks caused by this very technology? And it is in the hands of governments to do so, mostly. The World Bank Group, based on our evaluative experience, has a lot of expertise also in working with the government through policies, investment, and policy advice to mitigate those risks. I'm very optimistic about how this can happen as long as we're all prepared to learn from experience in the past. Technology is new, but the way we work, the way we do business, the way we live, the way we do everything is not new, so we can learn from the past. And I will invite everyone to visit IAG's website, where you have a lot of knowledge on how things have worked in the past, at least from the World Bank Group perspective.
Thank you, August. Very brief final remarks, Lindsay.
Empathy and human connection to technology, how people use technology, taking the time to make sure they understand how to use it is one point. Second point is donors pay for the cost of changing how business is done in development, because there's so much that can be done on the back end, but the system doesn't have incentives for it.
Zaky?
Yeah, if you are a company, I encourage to look at small business, because as far as I see, small business is very good business, is very profitable business, and they are a very beautiful business. And then if you are a government, please support them to use a technology, because by adopting technology, it can empower them and then generate data, so you can analyze better to help them. Because if you don't have the data, how do you help them? Something like that.
Thank you. Nora?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think that I would advise the World Bank probably to start doing a social protection assessment in a systematic basis, as they're doing in other areas, to assess to what extent the countries do have the ability to cope with, like I said, insisted throughout my presentation, the cause of displacement that the disruptive part of the technologies will create. I don't think we have the mapping of what every country is doing, and I know there's other areas in which the bank does it systematically, so I think that would be a very useful thing to have.
Thank you, Nora. Ferry Belhash, you get the final words of this panel.
Oh, thank you. Two issues. One, I've heard a lot government being put on the table. Frankly, in the region where I'm working, government is the problem, and government is the constraint. And we need to have a good conversation with government so that government becomes part of some kind of a solution. At the same time, and second, responding to Nora, I believe you're absolutely right. I mean, we need to have that kind of an assessment. Now, the issue is also that not all countries and not all regions are the same. When I look at the region I'm working in, we are so far behind that, frankly, the risk of having all these people displaced because of disruption is way less than to have people displaced because of lack of opportunities. And I believe this is also something that we need to keep in mind.
Ladies and gentlemen, disruptive technology and inclusive development, what works? I think this session was able to offer many thought-provoking thoughts and content that will help this particular question and topic to further progress.